day. This is a conversation about one less spark, one less wildfire, and more importantly, it's tips for homeowners from the Oakland Firesafe Council. We're a grassroots, community-based nonprofit organization dedicated to mobilizing the people of Oakland to reduce the risk of wildfire, to harm people and property through outreach programs and projects. First, we live in a high-risk zone, those of us that live in the Oakland Hills or in the Berkeley adjacent area. And that's basically the area from 1324, the Caldecott Tunnel, down to San Leandro border just above the zoo. And think of it as most of the areas above the two freeway systems of 580 and 13. But not necessarily. It's a urban interface zone picked by CAL FIRE, and based on fire materials and past fire histories, it's considered a wildland urban interface, a high fire danger zone, and does include some areas that fall below either Highway 13 or 580, primarily heavily wooded canyon or run areas in the hills adjacent to the freeways. To date, Oakland needs almost 31 inches of rain to make up its 4-year deficit. So we're facing one of the worst droughts in our history, if not in America's history. And within that, our fire season that started in 2013 has basically just continued annually throughout 2014 and 2015. Historically, our fire seasons were the 1st of May through the end of October or the early part of November. And now pretty much CAL FIRE and the local firefighters are pretty much on high fire alert throughout the year. And that's primarily due to the high, terrible drought conditions that we see. So, histories of big fires. We have chosen, those of us that choose to live in Oakland and in the hills of Oakland, we've chosen to live in an area that does in fact have a history of numerous fires. And it seems that there's been a major fire almost every decade of the past century and of the current century, you know, in the 2000s even. So those fires have been either put out by man or put out by nature, and some of those fires were before there were a lot of population living in the hills, and unfortunately the 1991 fire was after we had densely populated the hills, and we saw death and heavy devastation in terms of the loss of property and cars and etc. from that fire. So, one less spark. Close to 90% of all wildfires in California are caused by us, by people. They're not caused by lightning strikes or natural causes. And all 15 big fires in the Oakland Hills have been caused by human error. Therefore, avoiding a fire is within our ability to control, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. So what are the potential human causes of fire? Improper use of equipment, mowers, weed whackers, gas-powered equipment, and improper use of vehicles, towing of boats, RVs, other vehicles, etc., loose road chains, tow chains, etc., that can lead to sparks, that can lead to fire. We live in an area in which the humidity and the winds create, at various times throughout the years, extreme fire danger. Those are called red flag reminders, and we want to talk about what we can do as homeowners and as residents in red flag day. So, what is a red flag warning? And what does it mean to have a red flag warning? Well, a red flag warning is the conditions are just right, and those conditions are the plant temperature, the ambient temperature, the humidity, and the winds. And they either hit a high or a low or a certain condition that leads to the National Weather Service issuing for the fire services and local municipalities a red flag warning. And those will be available via the radio, TV news services, and newspapers when they do in fact happen. But we don't have to wait for a red flag warning to take action. We could be working in advance of it as the weather's changing and throughout the year to be prepared. So what to do? On a hot, dry, windy day, obviously don't go out and use your gas-powered yard and lawn equipment and outdoor equipment. But do review your evacuation and disaster plan, know your escape routes, know what you plan to take, etc. If you live on narrow streets without good passage for large vehicles like responding fire vehicles, please park your cars in your driveway or in your garage. You can park your car so that you're ready to leave, so you can be angled out, but there's no need to leave your car parked on the street to cause a egress issue. Please remove all combustible equipment from either under your deck or from around your house, or and sometimes where we forget, we have wood. A lot of us have wood fences here, and we keep and store combustible material along those wood fences. That should be moved in high fire danger days. Not the time, as we said, to begin to do your vegetation management. You should be doing reducing of your fuel loads and maintenance of your vegetation throughout the year. You should avoid doing anything that involves heavy equipment or gas powered or spark creating equipment on any red flag day, or for that matter on any high windy day. Okay, sweep your walkways, patios, and decks. One of the sources of fire for lingering embers is pine needles and leaf debris, etc. And you need to remove that debris from your roof and gutters. And that can be done on a hot and dry, windy day, especially if you're not using any powered equipment to do that. Obviously, it's not a good day to smoke or barbecue or do any of that in an outdoor environment. And please, once again, avoid any mechanical equipment that can and would in fact cause. Okay, the key for survival and for combating fire is that fire will happen. It's how to protect your home, make your home less of an ignition zone, and protect the structures that are on your property. So the goal is reduce ignition and reduce the sources of ignition near your structures, near your house, garage, deck, outbuilding, etc. So, Oakland has a defensible space criteria based on zones. Zone 1 being the immediate house zone, and what to do for your house and what to do right around the house itself. And this would include thinking about what would you use for mulching material right around the house? What would you use for a roofing material on the roof of the house? Where would you want limbs and trees, etc., over or near the roof structure? So what you're trying to create in Zone 0 is Zone 1 is a completely defensible space. You're trying to reduce the access that embers and firebrands have to getting into your house, landing on your roof, and creating a fire and turning your house from a safety zone into an ignition source. Because a house has a large fuel content unto its own. Frame construction, roofing materials, those kinds of things can add fuel to the fire, and you want to be defensible as possible. Zone 2 is the area, really, if you consider it your yard, the area immediately around the house where you probably have planted your shrubs and your trees, etc. And here you're going to want to be aggressive relative to the spacing of your plants and your trees. You want to make sure that your house is not overgrown, doesn't have large branches and dying vegetation touching it or over its roof or over parts of its deck, etc. So you want to reduce that. You want to remove that kind of material. You want to think about spacing and limbing. You want to think about the criteria of 3x. So if you have a shrub that's 3 feet tall underneath a tree, yes, normally we say limb to 6 feet, but because of the fire load of the shrub in that Zone 2 area, you may in fact want to limb to 9 feet. So that's the 3x rule applied to that tree relative to that 3-foot shrub, and you may want to think about that. And for those of you in Oakland that have the beauty of having the larger properties that have a Zone 3, that 30 to 100 foot area, whether it's upslope or downslope, or if you're lucky enough and it's relatively flat. That's where you're creating a defensible space between you and other properties and other ignition sources of fire. You're going to want to remove dead plant material. You're going to create an area where you've reduced the combustible material and you're maintaining green and thriving vegetation and removing all dead material. So, quickly, in zone 1, instead of using vegetable matter, mulch, or wood chippings, etc., think about using rock or gravel or crushed granite or other non-flammable materials to use adjacent to your structure. In that zone, plant succulents or low-growing ground cover, no more than 6 inches tall and at least a couple of feet from your windows. Keep them well spaced and remove all dead wood. And when things begin to die, and you know, it's a great opportunity as a gardener to try something else. Remove that dead plant and move on. And remove all vegetation items from under the deck or around decks and fences that would catch fire. Zone 2, your defensible space again. That's what I mentioned earlier as a yard. Create and maintain a landscape that, if ignited, will not transmit fire to your home. Remember, your home will become a major ignition source, so you want to reduce that transition. And this is where you're going to try to maintain the right sizing of plants, the right choice of plants, where you're separating your trees and shrubs, maintaining distance between your vegetation, you're keeping them trimmed, and you're keeping them green and vital, and you're removing any dead and dying materials. Zone 3 is that larger space, and here think about reducing energy for the spread of fire, whether you've become part of it and your house is now on fire, or whether you're still defensible. This zone is the area that stops it from spreading to a neighbor, to the hills, to the park, to stop the spread. And now this really is where you need to start thinking about spacing of trees and shrubs and separation of shrubs from larger trees and smaller trees. And you're really looking to reduce the height of shrubs to trees and get vertical clearance, get separation of the crown of the trees, allow there to be space and a well-pruned and well-maintained environment, because that'll reduce the load for fuel and stop the spread. Again, a drought-tolerant garden is a fire-safe garden, and in these times we should think about plants and plant material that is more drought-tolerant and drought appropriate in terms of the plants we need to replace. Choose drought plants that are low to ground, low sap or resin content. Choose fire retardant plants, species that resist ignition. Rock rose and aloe are great examples. Create islands with space between your plants. This gives you a chance to use different materials, different placements of maybe rocks and or other items to create a visual in your garden. And mulch to maintain water, but please think about using mulch, again, that's either stone or gravel and no more than 3 inches in depth. So as homeowners and residents of the Hills Fire area, there are resources available to all of us that can provide us information. Some of those exist on the internet, over the web. One of the best sources is Defensible Firesafe Council, and you'll find their website listed here, and they have great resources to look at. Another is a book by Dr. Robert Sieben, who's been a long time advocate and activist for fire prevention and for fuels management, and that you can find on the city's website at www.wildfireprevention.info at the site there, or at bookstores near you. That'd be a great source. In addition, sources such as East Bay Mud and their store online for plants and landscapes to help you deal with plants in a dry climate or during this drought period. There's also the East Bay Defensible Firesafe Council's book on vegetation management, Almanac for the East Bay, and that's available from their website as well. Again, We're the Oakland Firesafe Council. Thank you for listening. We are residents of the Oakland Hills, survivors of the 1991 tunnel fire. We're also open park space and park stewards and others working to reduce the risk of wildfire and its spread throughout the Oakland Hills. Thank you very much.